So kind of getting into it, you obviously wrote a book on the air of kind of being untouchable that the police have. I'm curious, kind of, I think unwinding that, it's important to get into the justifications people will give for things like qualified immunity or these other things that give them this sense of untouchableness.
Yeah.
One of those I often hear is how like police officers or departments need this, or they'll get financially bankrupt, or the fear of making a mistake will leave them unable to do their job. Is this something that you found to be true, untrue in your research? Kind of what did you discover?
What I have studied are the sort of systems around litigation. And the those systems give you good reason to think that those nightmare stories that you have described really aren't going to come true. For one, officers in most parts of the country are usually, if not always, indemnified. And that's a state law protection. That means that when an officer is sued, um, his defense and any settlement or judgment is paid by the city. And that's completely different from qualified immunity. When I've talked to law enforcement uh, folks um, about qualified immunity, um, many have acknowledged that the thing that police officers really should be worried about is losing indemnification. Police misconduct lawsuits amount to a very small percentage of local government's budgets. There's often stories about, you know, how much has been paid in lawsuits and how that money could have gone to fund community centers or libraries, suggesting in some ways that the lawsuits are too expensive. But what I've found is that in most jurisdictions, payouts in police misconduct lawsuits are less than 1% of the city's budget. And you can compare that to a third or 40% of the city's budget that goes to the police department itself. So I think these arguments are scary to legislators. And I understand why legislators hearing these kinds of concerns get scared that they shouldn't enact these kinds of reforms that would make it easier to sue.
So I'm curious then if you think the balance there is skewed too much towards their protection, because kind of when I hear that, my thoughts are then if they both have protection like almost completely on the legal front with qualified immunity, and then financially with like, it's going to be covered through taxpayers, essentially the city, there's no real personal consequences that the officer has to feel outside of maybe being fired or something. Is that something you see to be a problem also?
I do. And beyond, there's a third part of the process that insulates officers, which are union protections. So yes, so there's the legal protection of qualified immunity. There's the financial protection of indemnification, both of which mean that lawsuits are unlikely to have a personal impact on an officer. And then there is union rules, which can vary by jurisdiction, but can limit, how long a finding of misconduct stays in a person's record, how misconduct allegations are even investigated. Those kinds of union rules and protections are arguably part of the reason that the rate of citizen complaints are sustained so infrequently. And so all of these things combine together. They're all under the same kinds of justifications, wanting to make sure that officers have sufficient leeway, or aren't over deterred, but they all function together to provide this sort of interweaving shield for officers that mean that there are rarely consequences for things that the public would consider to be really wrong behavior.
And so I'm curious, and obviously this is the $1 million question, but then
Yeah.
if we were to try to address this, is there one that you think needs addressed first? Is there like maybe like what's the tinkering that you think needs to happen to kind of see immediate or to start taking the steps in the right direction?
Well, I in the end of the book, I offer a bunch of different ways in which I think that um, state and local governments could make important steps in these ways. And I don't know if there's one most pressing first thing, although Although, to my mind, sort of a cheat of an answer is saying getting more lawyers to take these cases, because once you get more lawyers to take the cases, then they can bring these other challenges to try to change the law. So in some ways, saying that the answer is more lawyers is like giving you extra wishes, because those lawyers can pursue some of these other arguments. But getting more lawyers to bring these cases, um, limiting union power to negotiate, limits on accountability in union agreements. And then I also think there's all sorts of sort of more fundamental questions that we should be asking about what it is that we're authorizing the police to do. And a friend, colleague, law professor named Fred Smith made the point when he read my book that, it's great to get more accountability when someone's been shot by the police, but they would prefer not to be shot in the first place. And so, that requires not just making a better system of accountability on the back end, but thinking on the front end about how to reduce unnecessary police citizen interactions. And, just one of many examples is thinking about trained mental health professionals responding when people are in crisis, instead of armed police officers who don't have the necessary training for those engagements. And, we unfortunately hear stories every week about another incident where someone who is in a state of mental health crisis has been killed by police. And uh, we know how to fix that problem, or at least make it better. And so, all of the improvements to accountability on the back end to the side, if I could have one fix, it would probably be that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Also, I'm curious when it comes to maybe, and that kind of goes into what I want to ask when it comes to portioning the blame for all of this, the fact that it is happening, the fact that maybe there's a lack of accountability when these things happen. How would you kind of portion that between the police departments themselves and their actions, and maybe not having that reined in, having the proper training? I think we would probably agree they're used for too much. I would agree with you, like mental health professionals maybe having calls on some of these would be better. But then also with like the courts, both state level, the Supreme Court, and then also Congress for kind of ignoring this legislatively. Like, how would you kind of portion the blame there?
I mean, can I say all of the above at the bottom of that?
It
I,
might be
I
the right
think
answer.
they all play a role. Those are all sort of um, interlocking entities that bear some blame. I'd also add in state and local governments. You can complain about union agreements, but it's the local government who has signed on to that union agreement. It has been a negotiating partner in it. You can be upset that police departments don't gather and analyze information from lawsuits to try to figure out how to do things better. But that's something that local governments could demand their departments do as a condition of funding, as a condition of indemnification. But they don't, or many don't. And so there's blame enough for all of the entities that you mentioned, but there's also some blame for state and local governments, and also opportunities for those state and local governments to do innovative things. And there are states like New Mexico and Colorado that have both passed laws to allow people to sue for violations of the state constitution without qualified immunity as a defense. And other states could be adopting that kind of legislation. They've considered it, but so far it's only been Colorado and New Mexico that have passed that kind of bill. So there's opportunities for state and local government to shed off some of that blame by taking some valuable action.
Totally agree with you there as well. Before I let you go, I want to give you a chance, like if you have like, I don't know, like a last message. Also, if you want to shout out your book, your website, anything like that, you can have the floor.
Oh, well, I mean, I would encourage you to read my book, which is called Shielded: How the Police Became Untouchable. If you're interested in learning more about my research, I do have a website, which is joannaschwartz.net. And the last thing that I would say, and I think it's really important to say in this moment, is that despite all of these challenges and all of these barriers to suing the government, it's an extremely important thing to continue to do, and important to remember the values that can be advanced in these cases. They're hard to win, but they can be won. And when they are won, they can achieve really valuable and important changes to policies, compensation to people who have lost loved ones, valuable days in court, and information. So these cases, although we've been focused on why and how they're so difficult to bring, they can still be brought and won. And I believe they're really important to continue pursuing.
Yeah, gotta keep fighting because giving up is definitely what they want. That's why they want it to be so hard, so you don't try. But I want to thank you again for taking the time to speak with us. If anyone does want to check out the book or your research, I'll have your website linked in the description as well, where they can find that. And we'd love to have you back on again if a topic calls for it.
Anytime, I'd be
Awesome.
thrilled.
Awesome. Thank you. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.